Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Broken Rails 1135th New Social Environment. I'm Min, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Peter Doig and Richard Shiff on the occasion of The Street, a show curated by Peter Doig on view at Gagosian. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Peter Doig was born in Edinburgh in 1959 and grew up in Trinidad and Canada before moving to London. Since 2002, he has divided his time between London and Trinidad. His work is represented in major public and private collections worldwide, and he's had survey exhibitions at Tate Britain, National Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo, Courtauld Gallery, and many more. And our host, Richard Shiff, is the F.E. Mary Kane Regents Chair in Art at the University of Texas at Austin, where he directs the Center for the Study of Modernism. He has published several essays on the art of Peter Doig, and his recent publications include Jack Whitten, Cosmic Soul, and Writing After Art, Essays on Modern and Contemporary Artists. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Richard, to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Min. Peter, so we're here to talk about the exhibition that's currently up at Gagosian that you curated. And I'm wondering, first of all, since you and I talked about the Balthus painting, which is a kind of centerpiece for the exhibition and gives it its title, The Street. So were you when you were planning this exhibition, were you thinking about the Balthus primarily and working around it? Or did you have a number of works in mind that would be interesting together and then eventually the Balthus emerged as the painting that you wanted to feature?
Actually, nothing was in mind really. It was just the Balthus. The thought was, if we can possibly borrow the Balthus, then maybe an exhibition could happen around it. I'd always loved this painting, and as people in New York know, it's rarely on show in the Museum of Modern Art. So I thought it would be somewhat of a coup to be able to bring it out of storage, and that's how it started really. When once we were given permission to borrow the painting, thank you very much, other paintings started to sort of find their place.
We're looking at the installation shot on the screen now, and so it's small, and it's remarkable how that painting, from a distance, as if you're looking through a reducing lens, how structured it is. That central figure ties everything together, the figure in white, the workman, quite remarkable. And the figures, a bit depersonalized, some of them, seen from the back, they become silhouettes. I think here of some of your figures in your work. There's the painting of the music store figure seen from the back. Do you feel an affinity to the Balthus painting in your own work, and at least some of the things that you do?
Well, it's interesting because I hadn't specifically really. I've always, as I said earlier, I've always had a fondness and fascination with this painting, and it's interesting. I've been reading quite a bit about the Watteau painting Ville, which is on show at the Louvre at present, and there's a sort of detachment in a way to the figures. That's you get absorbed by the sort of the figures, but you don't really know what's going on in the street as well, except for there's obviously many more figures in that painting. It's a young person's painting. I mean, he was 24, but it's obviously a very sophisticated one. It seems like it's the first sort of painting where he had to really consider the composition in a sort of structural way, and I think he had to sort of stretch himself to make the painting, find new ways of using the material, in a way replicating the street, the real street, as it existed. He wanted to give it authenticity, and I think that the connection maybe with the music shop is with the music shop and with some other paintings I've made that relate to streets and shop fronts of Port of Spain. I wanted to be authentic by sort of copying the sort of like, for instance, in this painting you see on the screen now, I didn't invent those musical instruments. They weren't painted out of my imagination. They were painted pretty much as I saw them. So it's not really my style in a way. I had to adapt rather the style of the person who made the paintings of those instruments on the music shop. And, you know, I tried to replicate the rusted galvanized as well as I could. And I think in the Balthus painting, if you look at it, it's more complicated than my one. It's more like a stage set. I mean, this could be a stage set, I guess, as well. But he's obviously gone to great lengths to sort of give the street the setting that he knew, the life that it deserved, to be believable enough as a scene for his painting, a setting for his painting.
Yeah, one of the things that fascinates me in that painting is the figure of the chef that I've always taken to be a mannequin, a signboard, you know, standing out there like an Alex Katz figure, flat,
A cutout, yeah.
Yeah, like a strange little sculpture. And but given the stiffness, the kind of stop action quality of the other figures, they're all frozen in the midst of a movement. Then that mannequin doesn't look so odd. It's the mannequin acquires the reality of the other figures, and the other figures acquire the reality or the fictiveness of the mannequin. Strange.
Well, it's as if all the figures could have been cutouts and could have been moved around. I mean, they're not like silhouettes, but there's a silhouette aspect to them, and it's almost like he could have had like a sort of play theater, and he'd moved the figures around to find the right composition. And the figure carrying the large plank of wood, which apparently comes out of the Piero painting of the I'm not sure if it's crucifixion, the painting leading up to the crucifixion, the guy carrying the member from the cross. It also looks like a mannequin as well. As you say, it's there is a stiffness to all of the figures.
Yeah, it's one of the things that maybe makes them seem right in terms of the architectural setting, you know, which is geometrical, rigid. I'm just noticing how the curving of the street, I guess, complements the slant of the timber that the man is carrying. It's full of all kinds of relationships like that.
Yeah, the perspective, and I think, as you pointed out in the conversation we had, the way the sidewalk sort of disappears above the young boy, the striding figure's right shoulder. I mean, there's plenty of devices in it. to make the painting fully animated.
So when you gathered other works together that are in the show, I mean, some of them relate pretty directly to the Balthus painting. Maybe the De Chirico, for example.
Yeah.
And others have a very different, or maybe the Rothko, even though it's brushier. Others have a very different character to them. And how, I mean, were you stretching the connections or wanting to get some personal favorites into this exhibition, one way or another, making unusual connections?
I think it was a mixture of both, really. I mean, I obviously wanted to get some personal favorites in there because so many of the paintings and artists are. And I just thought, well, start with the street and then open a few doors, look in a few windows, as well as turn around a few corners, you know, so that I didn't want to stick to the pavement or the road. I mean, I thought that, you know, you could open up a doorway and something might be going on. For instance, with the Auerbach painting, which hangs next to the Balthus painting. It was an Auerbach actually that I'd never seen in reality and only ever seen in reproduction. It always sort of fascinated me that he'd made this, for him, I thought, quite poppy painting, color-wise at least, and even drawing-wise. The drawing of the head seemed to be verging on the comic for Frank Auerbach. And I always assumed it was a cinema, the interior of a cinema with this figure of Arthur Rimbaud on the screen. But in fact, I was wrong, obviously. I mean, even the format of the painting is portrait, not landscape. So and you know, it was an unusual painting for him. It was commissioned by one of his collectors, who I think was also a close friend of his, and he wanted Frank to paint the interior of the church in Rome that houses Bernini's Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. And Auerbach sort of, I think, I'm not so sure begrudgingly, but he said yes, he would. And then I think once he started, he felt that he couldn't paint the altarpiece he didn't want to paint the altarpiece, and so he turned it into a homage to a hero of his, and actually I think a hero of his friends as well, which was Arthur Rimbaud. And I don't know the story behind it. I would love to know, but I imagine it was a great surprise for the man who commissioned the painting to see it when he got it. I hope it was a surprise anyway. But I found that you know, sadly Frank Auerbach just passed away. In fact, 2 days before the show opened, and I was through a mutual friend sending him images of the installation and getting his feedback, and he seemed to be very excited about the fact that he was hanging next to Balthus and next to Jean Hélion, and enjoyed some of the other paintings in the exhibition. But and also that this painting was brought out of storage. It has to be said that quite a number of the choices that I made were in museum storages, and I made that choice purposefully.
Yeah, that's quite an amazing painting, and with quite a story behind it. I too thought of it as some kind of theatrical setting as opposed to a church, and now that you mention it, I can see it as, you know, consistent with what you've said, and coloristically it is strange. I mean, that head looks a bit like Pinocchio, or like some kind of puppet figure.
Yeah,
rather than a real portrait. And this painting, along with a number of others, has the quality of a frame within a frame or a picture within a picture.
it's
And,
true.
I wonder if that was a factor in some of the choices that you made.
Well,
I
I
was,
think yeah, I mean,
go
I think
ahead.
it's something that came about again, not by design, but just by I guess coincidence, or maybe just what I'm attracted to, really. I think you could say the same of the Jean Helion painting, and the painting by Satoshi Kojima as well. Um, Pictures within pictures. I mean, it's Martin Wong as well. Um, these worlds within paintings. I mean, I absolutely love this painting, this Jean Helion painting, and I was so pleased to be able to borrow it as well. It's such a peculiar painting. It's especially for when it's made. If you think 1948, stylistically, it looks very graphic in reproduction. But actually, when you get a chance to see it, if you do, it's actually quite painterly within its borders. He'd moved from making those quite sort of geometric abstract paintings, which were, very, very accomplished and painterly in their own way. And he's suddenly making these paintings that require on a type of drawing that I don't know where it comes from, really. And these sort of mask-like faces and people with the news, and this man in the doorway who's maybe ignoring the news, or I don't know. It's just to me it's quite mesmerizing. It's got this sort of rhythm to it that is all of its own. I think he allows the sort of, I don't know if it's patterning or the forms that are on the men's clothes, the rhythm from the newspapers somehow, sort of it moves through the painting.
I just noticed he's got that anomaly in there of one of the building stones on the facade is cracked.
I know. Yeah, I just noticed that. I actually just noticed that as well, funny enough. And then one of the shadows are, well, there's all sorts of interesting details, shadows, and there's like a bit of smoke, and it's very playful, but it's also quite hard. It's not quite funny, and yeah, it's a seriously good painting.
Yeah, it's fairly large.
It is, yeah. I mean, the Met Museum in New York has a painting that's kind of a brother to this one that sadly is rarely seen. Maybe they'll dig it out of storage.
I was with regard to yeah, and of course the central figure is, come to think of it, is framed by the doorway. So it does become a kind of picture within a picture. And I was thinking of, there are all the things you mentioned, but there's also the Buford Delaney where um, the struts of the uh, overhead subway line probably, create little framed images. And it's a bit like the earlier painting of yours, which is in the show, of the play lot in
Yeah,
Manhattan, I guess.
it is. Yeah, I hadn't really made the connection. And interestingly, when we first saw the Delaney painting, it was very dirty. It hadn't been cleaned. And between the time that we chose it and it arrived at the gallery spaces, it had been cleaned, and it suddenly was just sort of electrifying, seeing the the color in it. I hadn't ever made the connection between that and my earlier painting, but yeah, I mean, the palette is actually not dissimilar, and it's that kind of glow. Weirdly, I associate the glow more with London streetlights and streets and the New York streets, that kind of yellowish glow, because all the street lamps here are yellow. But nonetheless, New York at night does have that special glow, you know, from coming from street lamps, neon lamps. I don't know, just light at night. And I think Delaney really captures that magically.
So that, I mean, on the screen right now, we've got an earlier work by
Yeah,
Peter, which has that framing effect.
yeah. It would be good if we could see the Delaney painting and also the night playground painting.
Let's see if we can get Delaney on the screen.
Peter and Richard, we don't have Delaney's photo, but
Oh, you don't have that one.
yes.
Well,
Okay.
you probably have Peter's Playlock painting, the big squarish one.
Night playground, it's called. There it is. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I made this painting in 97, 98, and I actually hadn't, when it arrived at the gallery, that was the first time I'd seen it since then. It was a painting that that kind of disappeared. It was someone bought it, then it, you know, was moved around a bit, and we managed to find it and borrowed it back. And yeah, it was you know, strange seeing it, you know, what, 30 odd years hence.
yeah, it does have that urban glow to it. And
it's a difficult painting. I mean, in reproduction, to me, it never looks particularly interesting. It's too, it becomes too condensed. You need to see it in detail, really.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You lose the details, and it's a very detailed painting.
Yeah.
With a lot of relationships that are occupying smaller areas within the painting. I
mean, there's a lot of paint. There's a lot of paint on it, not doing much other than being paint, which is, I thought, was kind of interesting to see in a way. The framework of it is quite simple, and then there's a lot of paint. And thinking about the figure arrangement, which to me was important about this, was because you know, I was leaving Manhattan by taxi. I guess it was in the mid 90s, and the, you know, light was getting low, and I saw this sort of incident in a playground or schoolyard, possibly more like schoolyard, I guess. And there was these guys. They weren't exactly children; they were probably more adolescents. Some of them looked like young adults, and there was this sort of running kind of game. I couldn't tell if it was a game or a fight, if someone was being sort of, you know, picked on or whatever. There was this, it was something, there was incident, but I couldn't tell what the incident was because I was moving in the other direction quite rapidly. And so what I did was as best as I could, I did drawings of all the figures, and then I cut them out on bits of paper and I moved them around, and sometimes I turned them around so they were looking in the opposite way than they were in the reality that I had. And then I formed this sort of, I guess, this sort of game. I guess that's maybe not too dissimilar to the Balthus, even though this is the figures are in miniature compared to his.
Yeah, that sense of an incident, you know, is maybe true of a number of the works in the show, and very often true of your work. even the painting of the lions of yours, which was included in the show, it's like an incident, a moment when I think you said at the time that it's not clear whether the lions are playing or being aggressive with each other in a less peaceful way.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a number of paintings of lions, and they came about because I take my kids when we lived in Port of Spain, Trinidad, to the zoo, and there's a lion cage there, and there's 3 male lions in the cage, and like in most zoos, the animals are quite bored, and they just sort of lumber around, and on this occasion, 2 of the lions were sort of play fighting, and I took quite a number of photographs, and when I looked at the photographs, I like the sort of ambiguity of, it was a kind of, was it a sort of loving moment, or was it like were they about to fight type thing? But I just also felt they were like prisoners really, and they just were getting, this was like their sort of relief in their their life of prison really. It was quite sad really. And I mean, this painting refers also to the Caravaggio painting in Naples, sorry, not Naples, in Malta, which I saw fairly recently, the killing of John the Baptist, which is probably one of the most extraordinary paintings I've ever witnessed live. The setting and the drama of seeing it in its circumstance, and the kind of architecture of this of where these lions are is no longer the zoo, but the architecture that in this painting, and then the views out in the painting refer to the kind of birthplace of fauvism, where Matisse and Derain were Collier, a fictitious Collier rather, and in a way allowed me to sort of turn up the color a bit and sort of create this drama and this killing going on in the background. I mean, I suppose the painting is a response to a lot of the killing we're seeing on a daily basis, in the news, and well, not so much in the news, but in media, and it seems to be a particularly violent time, and I felt I needed to make a painting in response to that.
So that's that device of looking through a framed opening. You use that a lot, and what is seen through the opening is often hard to relate to what's in the foreground. Like you've got 2 different worlds, and those worlds themselves are in some kind of conflict, in some kind of opposition. I wonder if you see that kind of relationship in some of the other works that you chose for the show.
I guess, I mean, I saw the Martin Wong paintings. I saw recently a quite an extraordinary show in London at the Camden Arts Centre that was a retrospective of his work, and I was very moved and incredibly impressed by the body of work, and the way he was able to sort of depict, I guess in a way, romanticize his world, the world where he lived, and his surroundings, and yet it just somehow it felt totally authentic and hard, but very, very beautiful as well. You could see, the beauty and the sort of the hardness and the griminess of of some of the subjects. So yeah, I was. I guess there's a connection. Also, in a lot of his paintings, I found there was like this looking through or trying to get a glimpse through. I mean, they're quite closed off. The two that I chose are actually quite closed off. You can't actually really enter them. It's that sort of like in New York, that sort of hardness of security. A door that's been locked for a very long time. A gate that is not just locked but double locked, and you feel that it's totally impenetrable. You'd have to bring the fire department with their sort of heaviest tools to manage to get in. And some of these things he paints, yeah.
So yeah, this is a terrific example because it's not at least with regard to the Martin Wongs that I've seen, it's unusual for them to have this much color in them. And that color is being framed through what amounts to a pictorial opening within all the brown tones that are more typical of Martin Wong.
Well, it was interesting hanging this next to the De Chirico painting that had this sort of much more sort of grand sort of edifices and arcades, and also a rather sort of grand framing on it, and yet the elegance of the framing within the Martin Wong painting, and he's turning sort of pipe work and I don't know, like guttering and into a type of elegance and frame and within the painting. I thought that was a really nice combination for me to see that.
And I wonder if we have the other Martin Wong available. I'm not sure, because that would be
with the padlock and the grate, the fence.
We do not, sorry.
We don't have that one. So that
Yeah, we don't have that one.
That would be a surface completely closed off.
Yeah, made a really interesting painting to make a painting of like essentially like a gate, don't enter. And yet he's painted it with so meticulously and so interestingly and with such invention that you enter the surface of it. You sort of your eyes just go all over the surface of it, but you can't actually, there's no depth to it really.
Yeah, it's all optical texture, that painting. And now it's making me think of your interest in painting walls, your own interest in painting walls, which are sometimes adorned with marks that somebody has put on them, but sometimes it's just the stonework that interests you. And so you have a barrier, which is the wall, and then you tend to have a view somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what.
Well, this would be
Yeah.
The collector sort of looking at pictures, but it's also a view to an exterior.
This was even though my studio in Port of Spain, my main studio in Port of Spain was in a very urban setting, in a kind of like a warehouse district, and it looked out to the hills. The hills were pretty much occupied with houses, but that was basically the skyline of the hills. And I made this painting shortly after moving back to Trinidad. I mean, I lived there as a child, and but I went back in 2002 as an adult to live. Excuse me. And I kind of changed. Of course, the figure comes from Daumier, Daumier, the collector of prints, I think is the title of the painting, and it's a painting of a sort of a man in a print shop looking at artist prints, and I changed the figure of the collector into the figure in my mind of an artist, and in this case, he's looking at kind of ghostly images of his own work, and they were actually ghostly images of all the paintings that I was making when I first moved to Trinidad, and it was sort of me questioning sort of their the idea was I was sort of questioning their authenticity, I guess, or what was I doing in this new space. And I was obviously dressed in non-appropriate wear for an island or a country quite close to the equator.
And it looks like that the central image is of palm trees, which, is that right?
It became a painting, yes, of called Pelican, of a beach with a figure dragging a dead pelican across a beach. The kind of pale painting in the center, yeah.
So in the exhibition, I wonder if do we have the Renee Daniels painting? Or if we don't have an individual image of it, we probably have it in installation shot, the abstract work.
I'll look for it.
Because that's a bit of an outlier in your exhibition, I think, that painting.
Yeah, I mean, again, a kind of painting, a painter whose work I really respect. And, in some instances, there was the hope of, it's at the other end of the other room. It's facing that painting.
Yeah.
It's a landscape format, sort of greeny blue painting. There it is. Yeah, that's it there. Can you zoom in at all, or is that impossible? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, so I was aware of these paintings when he was making them in the sort of mid 80s, I guess, mid to late 80s, and they always seemed unusual in the world of painting, and there was a sort of spirit to them that didn't exist in many other people's works. I like the layering in them, the way that they could almost be 2 or 3 paintings in one. There was a kind of thought process. There was nothing gratuitous about them, the way they were made in my mind. I thought they were very meant. There was nothing sort of particularly lyrical or he used the paint in he wasn't an expert painter, but he nonetheless clearly knew what he was doing, and I don't know, I just there were many paintings of his that I really responded to. In fact, in a perfect world, I would have borrowed a different painting, which is called the Academy, and it was a painting of a building which I always assumed to be a European style art school, and in every window you could see another type of painting, and I think it even says Academy above the door, and I wanted to that would be my perfect choice, because for nostalgia as well, because for many years I taught in art schools, and in fact I included 2 of my former students in the exhibition. One is to the left of Renee's painting, Lotte Maywald.
Yeah, and that painting coloristically works very well with the Daniels painting, and the Daniels painting has that string of openings, or possibly openings into another space, or the opposite, opaque color on top of brushier color, but there's a strip of rectangles and rectangles that are slightly distorted that become trapezoids, and that reminds me of so many of your works, as if there was a kind of unconscious sense of affinity occurring there. Your description of the Academy painting makes it even clearer, you know, what the connection would be.
Yeah.
And then in this view, you know, we've got the early-ish Peter Doig from the late 90s with its, again, you know, horizontal format, but strong vertical divisions. That's characteristic, I think, of quite a few of the paintings. And then there is your other. Go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like quite a number of the paintings in the exhibition do have these strong verticals. I mean, again, it wasn't something I was seeking out. They just so happened to be once we got them, once we not so much once we got them all in the room, because we had them to scale with boxes to scale of the spaces as well, so we could make sort of arrangements. But there was this, as you say, these lines, and I think I don't know if you've got a picture of the Beckman painting that's upstairs, the film studio.
Yeah, and the Kojima is next to it, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, those two.
Yeah,
if you could zoom in on the two on the left.
Two on the left. I have both. I have this one, an artwork image of this one. Would you like to have that instead, or?
Yeah, we'll be able to see it better, and then we can look at the Kojima afterward, where you've got verticals again and film images.
Yeah, I thought this painting is in the St. Louis Museum. They were kind enough to lend us the painting. I believe it was also in storage. A film studio outside of Berlin, which is still in operation. In fact, someone pointed out that Wes Anderson makes film, often uses this space to shoot films, or he's about to. So it still functions, and it's made around the time I think he was just about to, excuse me, make his first triptych painting. And someone else pointed out, I thought, quite good observation. This is almost like a triptych within a single frame. If you look, there's like three views within. There's the camera on the left with the kind of I guess, an interior alpine scene or snow scene. And then there's an interior, it's like another scene in the middle, and then another scene on the right. And fascinating that it was made the same year as the Balthus painting, 1933, or around the same time anyway. Balthus apparently loathes the work of Beckman. I was quite pleased to find out. Probably loathed the work of many artists, but I think particularly Beckman. He mentioned it by name anyway. It's something that I read, and anyway.
Yeah, people either really love Beckman or they just don't. And you know, I'm one who's always liked Beckman. Think it's remarkable painting style that he developed.
I mean, the great thing about seeing, doing this was having so much time with these paintings, and really being able to look and sort of witness how they were made, and surprising how fresh they were still. How in what good shape they were. mean, this painting really looked like it could have been made very recently.
Yeah, I mean, Beckman had this way of putting light on dark instead of dark on light. So
Yeah, it seems like he started the paintings with like a thin sort of almost like a black, like no color in it, almost just like directly from the tube, black mixed with a turpentine or thinner, and then he would draw the thing up quite sort of spontaneously, and then he would start adding more dark and color, and in fact they're quite economically made, when you especially this one, I think. I mean, compared to the one that's downstairs, the Bird Hell painting, which is another thing altogether, really.
so let's look at that Koshima
Yeah.
painting, which is next to this, and that's quite a wall, and now you get a get a sense of the scale change between the Beckman and the Kojima and the Elion. But this is, so is that do we take that as a poster or a film projection in the subway or whatever?
I don't know. I think it's just, I think that Satoshi, he probably he'd probably seen posters. Sometimes the interesting thing about being in these spaces like subways is like how the scale of sort of the poster image and the human and the actual human. Suddenly you've got this out of scaleness, and of course, and you take these things for granted, but I think that it obviously caught his eye, and he made this composition based on that. And but if you look at most of the painting, is really the tracks and the whatever the ceiling is, and then there's this sort of strip in the just off center where the action is. But you need the two bands with a sort of repetitiveness and the sort of I imagine quite slow painting that went into making it. I don't know. I mean, he was a student of mine in Dusseldorf, and it's fair to say that he explored the city quite a lot, especially at night, and he would come up with these images of these sort of Dusseldorf netherworlds, nightclubs, and God knows what, and then make these paintings that seem to sort of have a sort of timelessness to them. I don't know. I'm reminded of craft work. I'm reminded of certain sounds of, particularly craft work, really, I guess, because I associate craft work so much with Dusseldorf, and the academy is so much part of the city, and to me it's I don't know, it's magical painting, and the figure in the center sort of lost in whatever, he's lost in thought or whatever, and then this behind him is these two, I guess, gangsters from an old movie sort of occupying the space behind him.
And it's curious that he used stonework or brickwork where there are steel girders, and which introduces a detailing to the structure which is fanciful.
It's true. I mean, he's very interested in pattern and as I say, repetitiveness, and there's something that reminds me of music when I look at his paintings, and a certain type of music. This that type of music kind of repeats itself and sort of builds up rhythms, and I mean,
Yeah.
it's not unlike the Helion painting in some ways. I don't know if he was aware of Helion's work, but I felt that there was a connection there.
Yeah, that's an interesting juxtaposition. And then there's stonework in the Aeolian also. And thinking of so these three, which have a kind of verticality within their horizontal format, so their relationships are obvious, or relatively obvious anyway. And then there's something, that struck me as a little bit peculiar, although, well, I can see it with De Chirico, the Bacon that you chose, which is a remarkable painting. And were you just struck by what that was?
I would love to see a Bacon landscape show.
Yeah.
There's a Bacon portrait show on at the Portrait Gallery here in London, which I haven't quite seen yet, but people say it's the best Bacon show ever. I mean, I've seen lots, but I've never seen a Bacon landscape show. And this painting is, I don't know, he had a lot of attitude, and he had a lot of attitude towards other painters, and he wasn't particularly fond of the abstract expressionist painters. I think he referred to Pollock as the lace maker. So I think maybe even though this is 88, it is a copy of a painting he made earlier. There was a funny story that we heard that he wanted to borrow the original of this, or the first version, let's say, for a show in Moscow, and the collector, or Marlborough maybe, I can't remember, was the gallery or someone wouldn't lend it. The frustration of not being able to borrow a painting for an artist is horrible. For what you consider to be an important exhibition. And so he said, oh, well, I'll do another and it'll be better. And sure enough, he did make another painting, another, and I think it is better when you see the two side by side. So yes, this was not made in close proximity to the times when people were sort of chucking paint around, but and he liked to chuck paint as well. But this is him really sort of dousing an area of the painting, and it looks like, when you look at the painting carefully, that sort of spurt jet of water. I mean, it's almost like a toilet's been ripped off. I mean, God knows what was going on in the toilet to rip it off its hinges, but the toilet is ripped off and then the water's spurting out. But it looks like he used a tin of household primer. It's got that very sort of dry quality to it. The spurt, which he's he's excuse me, he's put a bit of color into it as well. And it's picked up color from what was below and probably wet oil paint. So he's using like an oil-based primer for that. So it's kind of like a by any means necessary sort of element. And this kind of big area of the painting, actually, this sort of gray brown, which is this kind of exceptionally beautiful color that certainly didn't come from a tube. I wondered when I was looking at it, and also the surface, if it actually come out from the bottom of a, the terps, the bottom of the residue in the terps container. I mean, most painters will know that if you don't clean your terps, you'll get this sort of sludge at the bottom of the bowl. And I heard a funny story about Bryce Martin, actually, that when he was at Yale, I don't know if this is true, but was a fellow student of his who told me, said that he used to go around at night and sort of take the sludge out of the bottom of people's turpentine containers and then use that for his particular grays. And you do get this thing, because of course the residue is made of every color that whoever was cleaning their brushes with. So you have this huge range of colors that make up this kind of sludgy gray, and it's kind of like it's one of those sort of unmixable colors. You could never replicate it, and it has a sort of slight shimmery quality to it. And anyway, that's what I that was my fantasy anyway, that
Yeah.
Bacon had the same thing.
Yeah, that that Martin story, that rings true because the grays in those 60s paintings by Martin, they have that quality,
Mm.
that you've never seen a gray like that before.
Well, the
And
person who told me the story, I think I can reveal his name, is Michael Craig Martin, who was a fellow student of his.
yeah, no, I believe that story, and that is a remarkable gray. I mean, I can't escape thinking of this image. I mean, given Bacon's attitude, as ejaculation.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and and it's destroying, so to speak. It's destroying a perfectly good organized composition that is below it, underneath it.
Yeah, I thought that was immensely brave in a way, and also immensely funny, that he would make this painting where he actually sort of, as you say, ejaculates on, and it kind of covers up the structure of the painting that existed, the one that he'd obviously put some time and work into.
Yeah. So was this a painting, once you knew about it, you couldn't resist wanting to use it somewhere?
Well, once we found out that it was available, I mean, it's you have to, there was it has to be said, there was a time frame to this selection as well. It wasn't as if we had years to do it. It was kind of like an experiment. What can we get? What can we what's available? There was a spontaneity to it in a way. If for instance, if you were given, if a museum asked you to do the same show and gave you 3 years to form it, it would probably be quite different and may not be as interesting in that respect, because there may be a multitude more choices, and you may go through the whole catalog rather than Bacon to find the absolute perfect painting, but it may not be as fresh as this one just so happened to be.
No, I think this one is great, and it looked fine, looked really good in the exhibition. I wonder if you want to, I mean, given the sort of degree of happenstance that you have to deal with, do you want to talk a bit about the study for the Balthus, the street that you saw, but you could not borrow, I think.
Well, no, we didn't actually ask to borrow it, and I know that that the people who own it don't really like to lend it, understandably, because it's such a magnificent thing where it is. It was a painting that he made when he was 21, and it was the first. I won't say the first version, because I don't know if he planned a second version when he made the one that we have when he painted this one. But I urge anyone who's interested in Balthus to to try and see a reproduction of it. It's also called The Street. Quite a few of the figures are the same. The adolescent male and girl on the left-hand side of the painting are not in that painting. There's a man with a bowler hat who apparently was Balthus's father, and he's holding the hands of two young boys who I think represent maybe Balthus and his brother Pierre Klosowski. The painting is painted, it's a much smaller painting than this. It's probably less than half its size, maybe a third of its size. And yet it's has the same sense of scale as this one has. The big difference, though, is it's painted in a very brushy manner. Balthus was very influenced and had great admiration for Bonnard, who he knew, and it's painted almost in a sort of Bonnard-esque way. Yeah, it's a fantastic thing. It's sort of shimmery painting. It feels more alive than this one in some ways. But I knew it existed because I'd seen it before in an exhibition in Vienna some years ago. And I've seen quite a number of the drawings too, the studies, which are also, if anyone's interested, well worth seeing, because they're so sketchy. Unlike the very sort of finished drawings we associate with Balthus, the very fine sort of pencil or Conte drawings. This one some of them are done in like black ink, and you would hate it, but they're, dare I say, slightly expressionist almost. Real sketches. So, but it would have felt a bit didactic, I think, to have, it's that painting and this one in the same show. We didn't really need that.
Yeah, it would introduce a different kind of effect. Certainly make it seem historical when in a way it's not historical at all.
It was interesting having the Rothko next to it, because the Rothko was painted almost at the same time as well. And, it could be said that Rothko was trying to find his feet at that point in time and it was like, what to paint, how to paint, look out the window, maybe, that, in a way, just, trying to find subject matter. And look out the window, you see the city, you paint the city, you paint the feeling of the city, you the colors of the city. It's a great young person's painting, I think. Both are.
Just thinking of the fact that Balthus had previously painted the scene, and so the earlier work might be considered as a study for the later work. You do a lot of reduced in size versions of motifs that you work with, and your painting process involves a lot of studies of details, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, how you feel about that, how critical that is for you when you're working on a finished canvas, which is going to be very large, and you're trying to find the right profile, let's say. As in these Balthus, the very curious figure of the central boy or young man, one wonders how that shape finally became what it is. And there is that sense in your work also of something being distilled to the point that it becomes the essence of what you were thinking of. So, I think it would be interesting to hear you talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, well, sometimes the idea needs to be, I don't know, worked out, and you can't always work it out on a picture that's got some size to it. Bears the question is like, how important is the size of a painting really? Is a smaller painting enough? I think we're conditioned as artists to make larger paintings because that's what we see in museums and exhibitions, and you feel that that's what that's what we're competing with in a way. People used to always ask me when I was a young artist, did I make small paintings. And in fact, in the earlier days, I didn't really make small paintings. I only made big paintings because I thought that you had to. And to me, it was, I guess in the earlier days, I used to think, wouldn't it be interesting to try and make a big painting out of something that should be a small painting? hard to or make a big painting of something that hasn't been seen as a big painting, because you associate big paintings with I don't know, let's say either if you went to the Tate, you'd see everything from like the Matisse snail to deluge scenes by John Martin to massive Gainsboroughs or Picasso's, whatever, big paintings. But then, when I was a young student, I would be thinking, well, what happens if I make something that's normally seen as more sort of a cartoon-like or illustrative type thing? What happens if I make that really big? Sort of challenge the notion of the subject. So there was always that that going on in my mind. But I still like the quality you get with a smaller brush, really. And I could show you a painting here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're showing that. We do have a slide of it as well.
But there's a certain quality to this that I don't know if I can achieve here. But that's the challenge. It's like, and that painting, it's got to be said, is that was something that was just sort of lying in my studio for ages. And it was, at the end of the day, I would just sort of probably just use paint excuse me, old paint that was on the palette, or dare I say, dirty turps, whatever was lying around. So it had a kind of there was a throwaway not caring at it to the way it was made in some respects, although I obviously carried on with it and kept it going. But it's more difficult when you've got a large painting to treat it in that way, like it's very much part of the palette, or part of the whatever one calls their palette. And that's why I've kept it.
Kept this small painting for yourself. Yeah. Well, it's got great humor and ambiguity in it, because the cloud shape is over on the left side of the horizon line, but the painter is not looking at it. And then there's the lion, which could be a real lion, could be a painted lion, and could be an imagined lion with its heraldic crown. And that lion appears in other paintings by you. So,
I think it's fair to say that one of the things that I liked about, or what I got from spending a lot of time in Trinidad, and which really struck me when I first went there. I went there with my friend Chris Ophelia, and the artist Lisa Bryce, and another artist called Andy Miller. With the four of us went to do a residency there in 2000. And I think it affected us all as a place of inspiration. In fact, it's evident, if we look at all of the work we made subsequently. But one of the things that really struck me was just how much of the city. I was more taken by the urban, really. How much the city was was painted. In 2000, all the shop fronts were all the shop signs were painted. There were no they didn't have those horrible plastic signs that they've now got everywhere, or photographic things where you stick up. If you wanted if you wanted to advertise a bottle that you were selling beer, someone would paint a bottle of beer. And people there's hand painted buildings everywhere, and people would hand paint their walls. So I mean, it's not fiction when you see a wall that color. Someone would paint their wall that color. They would paint their wall purple, and then they would, there was all these uses of color that I hadn't really sort of really experienced before in London, for instance, or in growing up in Canada. And so that sort of paintedness and that hand paintedness really affected the way I thought about making paintings. And this particular painting was I just saw this guy painting a lion, and it wasn't a cloud. It was a blank shape that he was obviously going to turn into something else. I can't remember. I can't remember what that actually became. But at the time, it was a blank. He was painting like a white space that he was going to obviously turn into something else, another form. But he'd already painted the lion, and the lion was crouching behind him. And I just thought it was just this sort of moment that I wanted to turn into a painting. And then within the city, you'd have painters. There was a guy called Ghost who he wasn't a graffiti artist. He was, I guess it was a form of graffiti, but he would make quite elaborate paintings of, figures and, trains and just these kind of very, very interesting choice of subject, painting them on walls in the city, and he would just sign them Ghost. But it wasn't like part of a tradition of graffiti. It was a sort of type of wall painting that I found really fascinating. Really, we got to meet these guys who painted things on the walls, and it was a kind of, sadly, within that time frame from 2000 to now, it's pretty much all disappeared. And so I think I was lucky. It was like being involved. It was like talking about analog in another way, to witness and sort of be part of the tail end of it was exciting. Now in retrospect, of time moves quite quickly, really, and you forget these important things are lost,
Yeah, so so in a sense, it's preserved in your painting of the music store, that tradition, because you're or here too in this small painting, you're reproducing the scene of this work going on. So this is Peter, we are out of time, and
okay.
So, but we're not over time. We're just about right. But we have some questions waiting. And so I'll turn it over to someone else for the moment, I think.
Thank you, Peter and Richard, for such a wonderful conversation. We have some questions from the audience. I'm going to read the first question from Elliot. I have a question regarding the installation. Did you get a lot of surprises when you had all the works around? Did it change a lot of your original plans? Which works, for example?
Good question. Well, funnily enough, the main room, this kind of squarish room where the Balthus painting is, that pretty much remained as it was. Excuse me. Because as I said, we had a scale model of the space and also paintings to scale. And I have to say I worked very closely with Parnaz Mogadassi. She was very diligent and really worked on the placement of paintings. And that was kind of set. And not too many surprises there, but downstairs we really changed a lot. And I think it was the power of the Beckman painting, which we didn't have a chance to look at, the Bird Hell painting, which to me is, very, very strong sort of reflection, sadly, of goings on today. It's kind of like Beckman's Guernica painting. And, we're very fortunate to have been able to borrow it. But it's such a powerful painting. And, we noticed connections between that and this painting by this English painter called Edward Barra. And so we felt that they had to be together. And then the V.S. Selman's paintings, which seem maybe an unusual choice, but also I found very, ominous, and especially the one of the fire. Now we put that next to the Beckman painting. So it sounds corny, but it sort of created a lot of heat at that end of the room. And the Martin Wong painting too, we moved that next to the Beckman. So it was almost creating a narrative, almost like that you could open up this grating and then there'd be this sort of horrific scene beneath, what you witnessed beneath the street. So yes, the downstairs room, really, we moved pretty much everything around, not just around, but like we sort of created pairings too a bit. Like, for instance, the Beaufort Delaney painting, when we realized that there was quite a lot of connections with my night playground, we brought the two pennies closer together. And it was just that kind of tweaking that went on. But yeah, hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Peter. Our next question is from Kate. You combine disparate items in your painting, as in the two lions paintings. Can you describe your process in making those choices? Is it a blend of intuition and intellect?
I don't know about intellect, but intuition, I would say, because I think the painting has to say that the lions were on their own for quite a long time, and I needed to create a setting for them. I have used the prison in Port of Spain quite often in paintings. I mean, I guess I could say I had the privilege of being in there and visiting inmates who painted, so I experienced that space. I was never in the prison, but I was never incarcerated, but I witnessed and got to know people who were incarcerated. And so I felt that I could at least begin to sort of try and describe what that might be like in a painting. So intuitive, but always from experience, really. That experience, for instance, and then the experience of seeing this Caravaggio painting in Malta. And so I think that the worlds that exist within my paintings, and I mean, not just my paintings, lots of artists' paintings, come from their worlds, but also the worlds of other artists' worlds. And I think that that painting, that's how that painting was made. Yeah. I was, when I made the show at the Courtauld earlier this last year, I can't remember. I got really interested in the paintings that Derain had made when he came to London as a young man, and he was in a way sort of imitating, mocking, referencing Monet, but in his own sort of way, which was this new way of painting from this sort of using very intense colors, fauvism, if you like. And and I sort of made me wonder, like, why have I not been more liberal with the way I use color? And so that, yeah, that's part of it as well.
Thank you. Our next question is from an anonymous audience. You include Prunella Clough in the exhibition. There seems to be a renewed interest in her work. Can you talk about your desire to include her work?
I'm glad to hear that there's renewed interest in her work. I didn't know that, but I'm glad to hear it. You know, in London is not New York. We have our own heroes of in the painting world, and I would say that she is someone who has always been respected by painters. I'm going back way till I was like when I arrived here when I was a teenager, like late teenager. I knew Prunella Clough was. She was teaching at Wimbledon. I studied at Wimbledon. She didn't teach me because I was on the foundation course, but I knew she taught in the art college, and she taught a number of friends of mine, and you know, I'd see her work in exhibitions. She exhibited at the same gallery in Anea Judah in London for as long as I could ever remember. And I think people who painted had a great respect for her work and for the way she painted, and the way she shifted her paintings. She wasn't afraid to, you know, make quite sort of different paintings, albeit all with this very sort of particular touch that she had and particular experimentation. And yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that there's renewed interest, because I mean, deservedly so. I mean, I think that, you know, a big exhibition of her work would be fascinating. Yeah, I was pleased to hear that.
Thank you. Our next question is from Gabriel. What can you tell us about the experience or desire to work narrative elements into your paintings versus the process of weaving a narrative through curating a collection of works for an exhibition like this one?
Ooh. Narrative painting is quite interesting. I mean, it's interesting how narrative painting is now quite possibly at the sort of forefront of what's considered to be sort of contemporary art. Whereas when I was a student, it was definitely way, way, way on the back burner, if not, you know, out the back door type thing. I mean, people had no interest in narrative type painting. In fact, it was considered to be, you know, totally sort of passé and sort of uninteresting, relegated to, you know, the dustbin of art making, picture making. So things have really changed. I'm not sure if that's a good thing for the most part, but they have. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in narrative, but not like necessarily a readable narrative. I'm interested in a sort of open narrative, I guess, where the viewer very much brings himself to the painting and then deciphers from there. I mean, it's interesting. I'm, you know, doing this thing with Watteau and Gilles, the painting Gilles, the Pierrot painting, and interesting to find out that, you know, Watteau didn't title any of his paintings, and said very, very little about the subject of his paintings. So everything that we know about Watteau is kind of, in a sense, a type of speculation or sort of interpretation. And I find that much more interesting than, you know, the telling of a tale. I think it's fair to say that most of the paintings that he chose for the exhibition operate in similar ways, really. Yeah, I mean, maybe the Beckman downstairs, which is, they're very sort of pointed signs as to what he's depicting, is different. But other than that, I think the paintings that allow themselves to be interpreted in different ways. And I think that maybe the Auerbach's a good example, really, like, you know, causes confusion, which is not a bad thing at all.
Thank you, Peter. And our last question is going to come from Wong. You can unmute yourself now.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Richard. I enjoy immensely your conversation because all of a sudden Peter is talking like a not historian and Richard is talking like a painter. I really enjoyed that very much. And you know, in when Bernard died in 48, I think it must have been the summer. My former teacher, Mercedes Matter, the founder of the New York Studio School, was attended to the show, and there were the Koonin, Klein, and Philip Guston, several other, and they were looking at one the Bonnard nude in a bathtub. And Guston was asking, "What do you think about the painting?" According to Mercedes, she say, Klein responded, "Well, I'm sure the nude would never be able to get out that bathtub." So it's interesting. I've been thinking about how the figure always absorbs into the background. And I think the same way about your figures in your painting, Peter. They get suspended in time. And it make me understand more and more why you would admire Balthus the street. Because they suspended, they're not absorbing it like Bonnard's figure would or your figure would, but it's similar suspension in time, you know? And as you say, it was so interesting that you discussed great detail about this. We know his great admiration for Piero, and we know, as you mentioned, he made that painting when he was so young. And something I remember clearly when I read years ago, one of my favorite writers is Guy Davenport. And
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He wrote excellent.
I have the book on Bonnard with the on Balthus with the cover with the cherry picker on the front.
Oh yeah, every force involved form, I think, something like that. I love his writing very much. But he says something very stuck to me, as always. He say Balthus' accomplished realism turns out on inspection to be both lyric vision and complex enigma. And it's so interesting. It's reminded me his friendship with William Stanley Hayter, Peter. Unlikely friendship. They met while we were art school in Academy Julien, you know? They were art still together. And he's really known more like a master printer. He had a print studio, even here in New York, and he taught Robert Motherwell, Pollock, even among others. But what is so interesting was that in the summer, early on, must have been in 29, that he gave the book Guthering Heights to Balthus. And you know he loved inlet literature. He even made an illustration of a lesser-known author named
Interestingly, he made those, sorry to interject, but he made those illustrations the same year as he made the street.
That's right. And I want to show you something very interesting. In Minotaur, the Surrealist magazine, when they commissioned him to illustrate the book, Guthering Heights, he only illustrated the happy beginning of that book when Heathcliff falling in love with Cathy in their adolescence, because the rest of the book is very tragic. And my feeling is that, you know, he decided to suspend his adolescence for the rest of his life, believing the fact that his body will decay, but the mind will be fixated, suspended in time, in that happy place, you know? And I don't know how to ask the question, except that I think that the American who have puritanical view about sexuality seems to misread his work so readily. And I wonder whether you think of that in the same way, Peter.
Well, I'm not sure of in that same Minotaur, but I think of, you know, Balthus's lifelong friend was Georges Bataille.
That's right.
And if you know the writings of Georges Bataille, and how visual they are,
Mm-hmm.
And imagine if they were visualized in painting form. What, you know, Balthus's paintings in a way caused upset people, or you know, whatever. Imagine that, and you wouldn't want to sort of you wouldn't want to censor his writing. It's so much, you know. I think you have to take everything in the context of time, really, and as I think you put it in a very interesting way. He maybe he suspended himself in his own time, and
Mm-hmm.
the paintings that we associate with him, that some of the more disturbing ones are definitely from that time frame. You know, they're not. I think it's like if I see myself as an adult looking at those paintings in a very literal way, then you wonder, oh my God, what's this man painting? But if you think of them in another way, like of in a different time frame, I think they can be read quite differently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know, yeah, I mean, I think that's my reading of them.
Like Humbert in Lolita, who is suspended in time
Yeah.
in terms of his sexuality.
That's right, Richard. And here you look at the illustration here. I hope you can...
That's extraordinary, seeing them all on one page like that, 2 pages like that.
Exactly, Peter. And this is
very lucky to have that magazine.
Thank you. Though I have in college, but basically the vision became more crystallized, because I believe that the same year that James Johnson Sweeney bought the street, he also bought the guitar lesson.
Yeah.
And so
we know the guitar lesson. Yeah.
Yes, we certainly do.
Yeah.
It's a great...
Well, if you read, I mean, I didn't really say, but there was a teacher of mine, a lecturer rather, when I was at St. Martin's in the early 80s, called Timothy Hyman. Yeah. He just died, sadly, about a month ago. He wrote an essay, which I shared with Richard and a number of other people, in 1980, called Balthus, the Puppet Master. Mm-hmm. And it's about the street painting, and then it goes on to be quite critical of his later paintings. I think he believed that Balthus became a kind of bourgeois in a way, and sort of this kind of lived like a lord and sort of, you know, whatever. Yeah. But I don't necessarily agree with him. But Balthus was very much alive when this essay was written, and I think Balthus was quite offended by it. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think quite rightly. But I do think he wrote very well on the street, and also the guitar lesson and paintings of that period. And yeah, I mean, shocking paintings. But when, you know, Balthus was asked by the man you mentioned who bought the painting and gave it to MoMA to adjust that kind of groping scene on the left-hand side of the painting, he quite willingly did. He said, yeah, he said, when I was a young man, I felt the shock. He said, I no longer do. And he repainted it. It was no problem for him, really. Yeah. So I don't think I'm sure, like the guitar lesson, I think, yes, shocking. Georges Bataille, Story of the Eye. Yes, shocking, you know, in aspects, but what a tale, you know, you know, you have to sort of, you know, I mean, you have to be able to sort of, I mean, I read that story when I was a teenager, and I will never forget it. And I'm glad that I read it. It didn't turn me into a monster. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, but to Richard's point, Humber, when Lolita was written, Nabokov wrote it when he was teaching at Cornell University. Mm-hmm. And according to Kubrick, when he was making a film, he came to the set and consulted very carefully. It turned out to be the great film, as we know. But, you know, just to somewhat related to the subject here, I once had the fortune to have met Jean-Louis Béraud, who was the protagonist in the great Louis Canet film L'Enfant de Paradis.
Oh, right, yeah.
Exactly. And I asked him whether when he was making the film, you know, whether he would have talked to Canet about the street, because so many scenes, so many fragments for that movie, it came to be so associated to the street and many other Balthus, because, you know, they were friends. And, you know, he said, yes, we talk about Louis Canet, about the street and Balthus painting. So I just want to make sure.
I
that
didn't
will
know
be-
that. I'm glad. I'd like to read more about that, actually, yeah.
I don't know where it's written, but there is a biography, Louis Béraud. I think he died relatively late, but I think that's sort of interesting to know at the time, you know, because that film was made during the war, Second War.
Oh, so
The-
that film was that film was made probably 10 years after Balthus made the painting.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Fong.
Peter. This is epic. Thank you. So I feel satisfied. And
No.
congratulations on the show. I loved it. I have other questions, but I let go. But I just want to say that it's great to see Jean Elion in the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
I
Well, thank you
love the work.
Thanks for asking us. We're not live anymore, are we?
We are.
Oh, we are. Okay. Not that I was going to say anything. Not that I was going to say anything inappropriate, but thank you for inviting Richard and I.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to see the show, coming back with a bunch of friends this weekend. So yeah, thank you. Back to you.
Okay.
Back to you, Min.
Okay. Thank you, Min, too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That's going to conclude our Q&A today. Thank you, everyone, for sending us such thoughtful questions. Thank you, Peter and Richard, for the wonderful conversation. And thank you, Perinaz, and thank you, Hallie and Allison from Gagosian for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation on the occasion of the exhibition, Makeshift Memorials, Small Revolutions. And as it is a Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you
Thanks so much, Peter.
Thank you,
Peter.
Peter.
Thanks,
That was
Peter.
great.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Matt.
Richard.
Thank you, man.
Fantastic. Thank